Welcome back to another beautiful day in Western Asia. So I will remind you, first of all, is that today is April 20th. So that means that your paper is due. You have until midnight tonight to turn it in. If you don't turn it in by midnight tonight, those of us who study clocks have a term for that, and that's called your paper is late. So please turn it in at by at the very latest midnight tonight as a PDF or a Word document. Those are the only two formats that are accepted. No late work is accepted on this, so you must turn it in today. You have known that this is due since the assignment was put out there into the world however many weeks and months ago. So make sure that you turn it in today. So after last week was a bit of a slog. We went through a lot of material. We covered a ton. So in this lecture and the next lecture, we're gonna take it a bit easy. We're not gonna power through all of these things that are deserving of their own entire course themselves. So as the syllabus says, we are looking at the legacy and influence of Hellenism and Persianism in the West. Now, West, I don't mean like the United States or even Italy, but I mean the West of where we've generally been looking. So in Anatolia and the Levant area. So the peoples who weren't part of the Iranian empires. Now, the first site that we're going to look at for a little bit is Hatra. Now, Hatra is located in Mesopotamia, pretty much dead smack center Mesopotamia. It was a city-state that was subordinate to the Arsacid King of Kings. So it was its own little kind of city-state, just as we can think of the Greek city-states, only there was a overarching rule that the Hatrine kings kind of reported to, and they reported to the Parthians. And Hatra was the largest pre-Islamic Arab city in the world, all the way up until the coming of Islam. Hatra was a massive city, and you can kind of see by its location that it is very well set off for a trade city, as to where it kind of is that area that's halfway between the Euphrates and the Tigris. It is on a major road full of oases that runs in from the Mediterranean and then deep up into Central Asia. So Hatra is kind of one of those major hotspots of trade and of people being there, just because of its location. Now, the Hatrine religion is a mixture of all of these different religions. I guess you could use the term religion, but all of these different gods that we've studied before. So we have Shamash, as we've seen plenty of times, and then we also have like Nergal, the sky god. We have a whole bunch of other ones. There's mixtures that we see of certain Zoroastrian and Iranian deities. So it's kind of a big melting pot of different religions. And the excavator was under Andre, a notable German excavator who also excavated Assur, of which we talked about in the last lecture under the Parthians. So today we're going to be looking at kind of three sites, essentially. We're looking at Dura Europos. No, sorry, we're not looking at Dura Europos. We're saving Dura Europos for our very last lecture, the religion lecture. That's my apologies there. But we're looking at Hatra now. We will then look at Palmyra, and then we will be up into Sophene and Comagene under these lovely people called the Orontids, and that's how we're going to end our lecture. And you can see that I am in front of an Orontid monument right now. So we will get to that at the very end. So look forward to it. So the city of Hatra was made essentially on a massive circle. The outer wall was this huge circle. There is my mouse, couldn't find it for a second, is on this huge circle, 2 kilometers in diameter, with a central temenos. So we've talked about the temenos before under the Assyrians and the Elamites, as to where the temple precinct is set apart from the rest of the city. And as you can see here from the satellite image, you can see the massive amounts of looting that took place. But the one good side of looting, if there ever could be one, is that it shows us where a lot of the houses were. So you can see all of these houses that surrounded this central temple precinct here. Also, as you can see, that we have multiple temples within here, where we have Shamash, who is one of the main gods located in the central temple district. And what's really fascinating, as we'll see, is that there is a really interesting fusion of Parthian style of architecture, Mesopotamian architecture, and very distinctly Roman architecture, all brought into one place. So this is a aerial picture of the central sanctuary. This is before the excavations, and as you can see, it would have been one of those areas that stood out in the Mesopotamian plain. So as we talked about with Babylon and Seleucia on the Tigris, it's pretty darn flat around here. So any large structure, like the main temple precinct here, would have definitely stuck out and been visible from all around. And here are some more pre-excavation photos. You can see that they are in a very ruinous state, as one might expect from architecture sitting out in the desert winds for hundreds and thousands of years. So one thing you'll notice is that these, none of the arches, these main arches, existed at the time, and they were in fact reconstructed out of all of these blocks that were found on the wall, on the ground. So what we have here is this tripartite Avon structure. We've talked about the Avon when we were talking about Assur, how that was the first Avon to appear in Mesopotamia. And here, around 100 years later, the Avon appears at Hatra, this kind of independent city-state. And as you can see, it is these massive arches, particularly this guy and his little dog here, really exhibit just how large these were. And the Avon started out very much as this palatial architecture type, and it was really only reserved for large buildings and buildings that were associated with human habitation. And what we see at Hatra is that is being appropriated into temple architecture. So that language, that architectural language of prestige, is now being used into the religious sphere. So the religion itself is starting to get its own sort of prestige because of the architecture that was used with the Arsacid buildings. Looking at the site plan, we have this Grand Avon, as it was. We were just looking at that. We have, as I said, we have this mixture of Greco-Roman style and this so-called Hellenistic temple. We have this temple of the Palmyrene Triad, of who we'll speak about in a little bit, and this really fascinating quadratic temple, the Temple of Shamash, which is entered from this large Avon. And what's really fascinating about this is that this architectural form kind of foregrounds the fire temples that we see in the Sasanian period. And we spoke a little bit, we saw a little bit of this at Tokde Sangin in our last lecture, but this type of form really kind of has a longevity and a reinterpretation and reuse, and becomes kind of the main architectural form in the Sasanian period for their temples. So looking at the Avon, this one is here, the large Avon, and this was during the US war in Iraq. As you can see, it is absolutely massive, and this Avon is built on the Roman style of arches. So at this time, we're seeing both the inclusion of very much a Parthian architecture of prestige. I was going to say arch of prestige, but I guess that is technically what it is, an architecture of prestige being built with Roman style materials. And here is one of the entrances. This is the south gate, that entrance into the main temple precinct. And you can see here that we have a post and lintel type structure that is surmounted by a arch. And this is something that becomes very common in later Roman architecture as a kind of a dual functionist, where you get double the amount of decorative space by having both an architrave with its entablature and an arch in which you can decorate. As far as I know, there isn't really any sort of religious significance, but it does seem to be something that an innovation that just kind of appears and is used, and it seems to be used here at Hatra as sort of speaking both to the Parthian precedent with this large vault fronting a wall as the typical Avon structure, and this Roman style gateway slash entranceway. And on it itself is a coffered style of door jamb, which we saw at in way Old Kingdom Egypt and at Persepolis and Pasargadae. So those are some more wider connections of this architectural style that reaches well beyond both the time periods and the cultures that we're currently talking about. And here, just a reminder, is the 4 Avon Court at Assur. Again, building on those same precedents of power and architectural prestige. So Hatra, unfortunately, was one of those sites that ISIS took over. And as you can see here, we have 2 ISIS members completely and utterly destroying these sites. And what we can see, though, is that we have this very interesting entablature here, which draws heavily on a Roman style. We have this egg and dart frieze here, and a bead and reel frieze here that is below the egg and the dart, as well as this sort of split palmette frieze above. And what's really fascinating about this is that at the 4 Avon court of Assur, as we just saw, there is a very similar entablature that was put up there. And down here we have these acanthus leaves, these split acanthus leaves that are very much drawing both on Roman and Parthian precedent. And one thing that we should keep in mind is that these artistic styles that we're seeing, there is so much interplay and exchange between all of these artistic styles that it's really hard to kind of suss out exactly who's being referred to, if anyone. But for the people in Hatra, the people who constructed this was very much speaking to the prestige both of the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire through these architectural iconographies. Now, these 2 statues of Hatrin kings, unfortunately pre-ISIS destruction, are really absolutely fascinating because these 2 kings are dressed very much in this prototypical Persian garb. You remember in the previous lectures, they talked about as the Romans saw it, if you were wearing pants, you were a barbarian. Well, for the Parthians, pants were the kind of ultimate style. It was the cool thing to wear. It's like overalls today. I think people are wearing overalls now. I don't know. I'm not a fashion person, as you can probably tell. But what's really fascinating about this is that the Huttrian kings were looking to the Parthian precedent of clothing and styles of dress in order to show their own kingship. And as we'll see with Palmyra, there is a lot of really interesting interplay depending on who they wanted to kind of, I guess you could say, suck up to. As to who they wanted to get into favor with more, they would exchange the clothing that they were wearing, the particular modes of how they would represent themselves in art in order to speak to these different constituencies. But the style that we're seeing here is very similar to Parthian clothing, especially if you think back to the coin types of Apollo Nabu, who had those very similar kind of wavy trousers. And you can see here that these tunics that they're wearing are very interestingly and heavily decorated. And these were would have been of a brilliant silk, some brilliantly colored silk, and perhaps even with pearls or gold sewn into the cloth itself, and it really a style of prestige. And here is the members of ISIS trying to destroy these statues. And what's really kind of fascinating, I guess if you could call it fascinating, is that they were not strong enough to destroy the statues with sledgehammers. So they had to pull them down, and the video shows them, it took them forever to destroy these because apparently they just got really weak arms. I don't know. Here we have another image of a Huttrian king holding what is an eagle, although you could be forgiven for thinking that it kind of looks like a turkey. To me, it looks remarkably like a turkey, a very fat-breasted turkey. But what's really interesting here is that we're starting to see a style appear, which is called this corimbos, which is essentially a bunch of hair that is all put up into a ball and sometimes has cloth draped over it and tied around. And this becomes, under the Sasanians, the absolute depiction of kingship, is that this corimbus is the style of hair that the kings wear, and that is something that we see developing in Hatra at this time period. Here is just another view to kind of give you a sense of scale. This is entering through the gate into the main precinct. So here we have the outer precinct, and then this is the gate that gets into it. Also amongst the statues were these two lovely guys. We have King Sanatruk II, who ruled from 205 to 240 CE, so up into the Sasanian period. And he is holding a little representation of Nergal, of who we spoke about a little bit earlier. Nergal is kind of that massive sky deity. And you'll notice on his head, just as we saw with the last two statues, these ones here, he's wearing this really interesting type of cap. It's called a kolaf, K-O-L-A-F, and that was this cap that was given to the nobility by the Arsacids, and they had all of these little designs on the side of them. They were really fantastic hats to wear, and they would sometimes flop around. They're alternatively known as the Parthian floppy caps. But one thing that you will definitely have noticed throughout all of the depictions of the men here is that they have these massive mustaches. They have quite beautiful mustaches, and that was very much a part of the Parthian tradition, and later Sasanian tradition was facial hair. And as we talked about with the Achaemenids, is that the facial hair was the important bit of being a king. So we see that again with the Huttrian nobility. Looking at this victory relief of Sanatruk I, so one of the earlier Sanatruks, you see this beautiful fusion of Roman style and kind of Parthian and later Sasanian style, all in one relief. So here we have this victory monument, a very similar to what we see with the Roman standards, and it has a depiction of Helios on it and a diadem streamer coming down. So just like we see with the Parthian coins, this diadem, we have a winged victory or a Nike holding on to these rings, perhaps diadems, coming in. So very much a kind of Roman influence. Here is a small little fire altar, and we have this offering cup here. So very much speaking to a Arsacid Iranian precedent, just like the fire altars that we saw on the reliefs at Bisatun, Naqsh Rustam, and Persepolis. So those that similar type of little fire altar. We have these very, very prototypical Parthian clothes, as I mentioned. You'll notice the hairstyle very much similar to the Parthians, these very tightly curled hairs. And on his head, he has an eagle, so speaking to the Roman side with the Zeus slash Jupiter idea that was very prevalent throughout the Middle East at this time. So you'll notice that this is a very interesting fusion. And up above, we have these crenellations that speak very much to Parthian and later Sasanian architectural precedent. And we've seen some of these crenellations on the Achaemenid monuments at Persepolis, and they were also present at Uruk and Ur and Babylon. So it's a very, very kind of prototypical Mesopotamian style here. Looking then at this lovely relief of Nergal, who was found in Hatra, we could make a very lovely kind of comparison to the so-called Queen of the Night motif. You'll see that we have these very similar ideas of painting and these kind of partially in relief votive plaques. So very much drawing on that long durée of precedent of these small votive plaques. And here we have Nergal, that god of the sky, and with all of these fascinating creatures. We have two little scorpions here, a little snake, another snake here, and three dogs, all part of the iconography of Nergal. And of course, we can make a very direct reference from what we have with these two victory standards here of Sanatruk and Nergal, both kind of making this combination between both the god Nergal and with Sanatruk associating himself with the standard, Nergal associated with the standard. So there's all of this sort of interplay, all kind of jam-packed into these two fantastic images. Now, we can also see, as I mentioned, the standard drawing on Roman precedent. And here we have from the Arch of Constantine, so much later than Sanatruk. And here the column of Trajan, so around the same time, you can see that we have these victory poles, these victory monuments that are all kind of very much beholden to the Roman idea. And in fact, this little detail here from the Augustus of Prima Porta shows a Parthian returning the Roman battle standard to Augustus after the loss of the Roman battle standard at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE by Crassus. So you can see that we have this very interesting interplay of both these Roman styles, especially with what we're seeing over here, and with the Parthian styles of here. So it's very much the people in Hatra. And as I mentioned, it is a trading city. So the people of Hatra are playing both to the Roman side and to the Parthian side. And one way that we could think about this is that if you were, say, a Parthian noble and you came to Hatra and you saw this relief, you would immediately recognize the elements that are similar to ones that you're used to. So all of these Parthian elements you would definitively recognize. But if you were, say, a Roman merchant or a Roman aristocrat coming to see this relief, and you come to Hatra and you see this relief, and you would very much be able to recognize these symbolisms as beholden to a sort of Roman precedent. And let us not forget that this winged victory, holding the diadems or the rings, is something we also saw on the Parthian rock reliefs of Gotarzes. So again, it could also, this winged victory could also be speaking to that Parthian idea as well. As I mentioned, this is a very muddled kind of iconography, so we don't know exactly who they were trying to speak to, but we do know that they were incorporating all of these different motifs in order to speak to these multiple audiences. So it really kind of depends on the viewer of what was being understood and what was trying to be said. So just a brief foray over into Rome. If you want to learn more about the Augusta Suprema Porta, you can take a Roman art class. And here, from the Res Gestae of Augustus, I compelled the Parthians to return the spoils and standards of 3 Roman armies and humbly begged the friendship of the Roman people. So here, Augustus, as we saw on the last slide, we have the return of the standard of those legions who were completely and utterly destroyed by the Parthians. The Parthians were totally outnumbered, and they completely decimated Crassus's army. So here we have Augustus saying that no, we're having them. They have to bow down to us. We're the better people. We got the standard back because we're more powerful. And he even put it onto his coins. You can see that similar representation of the pants and their lovely little pointy boots. So very much using these polemics against the Parthians in the Roman Empire. Moving then to Palmyra, this is another one of those sites that we talked about way at the start of this semester with the destruction by ISIS. But Palmyra was another one of those incredibly important trade cities. And they cut their teeth on trade, and they made their money on trade. It really flourished from the 1st to 2nd century CE. So all of these movements from the kind of fledgling Roman Empire that's starting to take over the Levant and the Near East, and the incredibly powerful Arsacid Empire in Iran, Iraq, and Syria, who had had almost 100 and some years, 200 years to be able to gain power. So Palmyra is playing both sides, is that they make their money on being this massive trade entrepot, moving from Palmyra up over to Dura Europos, and then into Hatra, which is here, and then either shooting down over to Ctesiphon and Seleucia on the Tigris, or shooting up into Nisa and Merv and bulk of the cities we talked about before. So looking at the beautiful Palmyra, you can see this panorama is absolutely incredible. I had to include it in here. There's no other reason than just to show just how amazing the ruins of Palmyra are. But you'll see that we have the main kind of principal parts of the city are all kind of visible through here. We have the major colonnade here. The Temple of Baal Shamin is right here. And looking a little bit more at the site plan and a bit bigger, we have here, which is that sanctuary of Bel, this massive sanctuary that was blown up. We saw the images of that so long ago. We have this embolos or portico colonnade that runs across the entire length of the city. Here is that tetrapylon, which is this fantastic monument under the reign of Diocletian that was also destroyed. And of course, a theater. You can't have a good theater you can't have a good kind of Romano-Greek, Greco-Roman city without a theater. So of course, Palmyra has to have one. And there would have been traders from the Roman Empire who had very much kind of patronized this site. So looking at the tetrapylon, it gets its name from 4 pylons. It's descriptive, it's in the name. So 4 pylons, and this is a tetrapylon because each pylon has 4 columns that hold up the massive entablature. And as you can see, just how large it is with this person here, but this style is called a tetrakoinion, which means that it has no roof. So at some other sites, like Timgad over in Africa, which was another Roman site under Septimius Severus, that one was a true tetrapylon because it had a roof over it. This one is a tetrakoinion because it has no roof. So it was an open air, and it was part of the colonnade itself. And this was kind of a area of crossroads. And that is a very important part of what we see in these Roman cities, is that we have these massive imperial projects, this one done under Diocletian, that mark kind of the central area of the town. So we can think of these very much like triumphal arches of the later Roman Empire, where it is a mark of showing one's prestige and one's wealth. And of course, we have the theater where unfortunately and sadly, horribly, that ISIS executed all of those prisoners. But here the theater very much drawing on Roman precedent. There is, basically all of these Roman theaters that you see look very similar to what we see here, where we have these lovely Corinthian columns on the scene, the opera in front, and the stage with, of course, the kind of horseshoe seating arrangements, very typical to what we see with all of these Roman theaters. Now, the Umbelos, which is this porticoed street, ran, as I said, across the entire length of the city. And what was really fascinating about this is that on all of these statues, they had all of these columns, they had these little platforms in which statues of various peoples of the city would stand upon. So very much this kind of immersive environment as one walked through the city. And this could even, one could make a comparison of this to the Forum of Trajan in Rome, who had similarly all of these Dacians whom he defeated, all lining along this major portico of the central forum in the Forum of Trajan. However, instead of defeated peoples, it is local Palmyrene peoples who are located here. And looking at the inside of this gate, you can see that it draws very much so on this Roman precedent of arch and vaulting decoration. You can see here we have this lovely geometric frieze with a kind of rosette motif in the center. Here at the Arch of Septimius Severus in Rome, a very similar execution of it. And what's really fascinating is that we see a very similar type of interior vaulting decoration in the Parthian Empire as well, and very much so later in the Sasanian Empire, of which we'll look at next week, I believe. My God, we're already at the end of the semester. So yes, what we have here at Palmyra is drawing very heavily on Roman precedent with some of those kind of Eastern influences included. Now here we have the Temple of Baal Shamin, again, unfortunately destroyed. And this was inaugurated for Hadrian's visit, inaugurated and consecrated for Baal Shamin. You can see very much this is a typical Roman style temple. It's very much kind of hearkening to that Roman religious architecture of prestige, but it is speaking to a local god, a Mesopotamian god. And what we see with religion in the Roman Near East is that we have the imperial religions, so the religions that are typical to Rome, so the Capitoline Triad, the imperial cult, so the cult of the emperor, and the priesthood, so the pontifex and the augurs are positions that are brought in. But essentially, what happens is that the cults of the local populations get to keep their gods and they continue to use their gods, but the temples are now built in a Roman style. So just like what we see here is that we have a Roman style temple with a Mesopotamian slash Levantine god. And the deeper influence of kind of Roman style of gods and Roman cult buildings is what we have where the veterans were settled. So where the Roman veterans were settled after they had served their time, we see much more of these kind of prototypical Roman religions and Roman structures appear. So just like at Jerusalem. So here we have a depiction of the Palmyrene triad. So Aglabal, who is this lunar god, this is the one on the left, Baal Shamin, that ultimate kind of sky god, and Malachabel, who is the sun god. And they're all dressed in this Roman style. So comparing that to what we saw with the gods over in Hatra, here we have very much these Roman influenced gods with their swords and with their dress. But you can see here we have that inclusion of the diadem speaking a bit more to the Parthian side than to the Roman side. So again, we're seeing kind of that fusion of different cultural iconographies all brought into a single structure or a single image. Palmyra is probably most famous for its funerary reliefs. There are so many of them, and they're all absolutely incredible. They are executed so brilliantly that they're just a wonder to behold. Here you can see the very much Roman style. You have this Roman haircut here on this teenager. And these kind of contemporary Roman styles with the female styles. She's kind of exhibiting the height of haute couture. That was a horrible pronunciation, I'm sure. But she has all of this jewelry on, probably in gold, in precious stones, this lovely headband, and this hair wrap with a very kind of contemporary Roman hairstyle for the time. And what we see here is these funerary reliefs really kind of capture the essence of these Palmyrene people. And we see the kind of the fusion of all of these different cultures coming into a single city. It really was a melting pot, a cosmopolitan world that Palmyra was. And that's really what I want you to take away from Palmyra and Hatra, is that we're seeing these really cosmopolitan natures through the art that they produced and the material that they left behind. And one of these very fascinating funerary reliefs is this hypogeum, so this underground cave, it's a fancy word for cave, of Yarhai from Palmyra. And you'll notice that in comparison to what we just saw with kind of those very Roman style of garb, here this relief has very kind of typical Parthian garb. We have these long floppy pants, the more pointed toes, and they're reclining in a pose that we see in some Parthian reliefs, but we also see this in Roman reliefs, particularly with some of those very early Etruscan reliefs that are, and unfortunately I forgot to put an image in of those Etruscan ones, but if you search Etruscan reclining relief, you'll be able to see it, or Etruscan sarcophagus, I believe. But here we have these Palmyrene nobles who are dressed very much in a Parthian garb. So you can see kind of who they are trying to speak to with their funerary monument. And here is another beautiful comparison. So we have a man who, with his family behind him, his daughter, his son, and his wife, and he is in the very typical toga, wearing his kind of Romanesque toga, speaking to the Roman side. But here we have another man with his family, and he is wearing that Parthian garb. So we have basically the exact same relief, the same sort of idea behind the relief, but executed to show different allegiances. And here, just another comparison with those king statues from Hatra. You can see very much drawing on those same precedents. So we have these roundels here, repeated on the top, the bottom of his kind of tunic and up into his pants, and just the beautiful decoration that were on these sculptures. So very much a kind of cross-pollination between Hatra and Palmyra at this time period. And of course, we see this with the depictions of women as well. So these, this kind of covering over the head with the woman holding on to it is a kind of typical depiction of a deceased woman. So she kind of has this veil over the back of her head. And we see the same thing at Hatra with this lovely headdress, massive headdress, again seen here and here. So very much a shared visual vocabulary between these two, where they're kind of slipping between more Parthian and more Roman, and very much they're developing and working through these styles depending on what kind of fealty they want to portray. So the final place that we're going to look at today is Orontid, Sophene, and Commagene. The Orontids are one of the most complicated and amazingly awesome dynasties to have existed. They really are one of those fascinating peoples. So the Orontids basically come out after the fall of the Kingdom of Greater Armenia, which kind of rolled through all of this area here. And they then we have kind of the Orontid dynasty, which is both Commagene and Sophene together. And they then split off into these two branches. But what's really fascinating about them is that the Orontids claim Persian and Greek ancestry. So as you can see here with the founder Orontes, he claims basically he claims descent from Darius I through Artaxerxes II, who then Orontes is originally from Bactria, so over in the Iconium area. He goes and marries one of the daughters of Artaxerxes II, supposedly, gets appointed satrap, so governor of Armenia. Then he basically screws up a few times and he gets demoted, but the Orontid family under Samos, Arsames, and Mithridates then kind of control this area very much so deep into the coming of the Romans and the Parthians and Sasanians. And Mithridates supposedly marries Laodike, who is of Seleucid stock. So they claim both Persian and Greek ancestry. So what they're doing is they're able to basically switch between the two sides, the Parthian side and the Roman side based on their genealogy. So just as we saw with Palmyra and Hatra, they were doing it through their art. Here, the Orontids are doing it through the lineage, their lineage itself. And it's really fascinating what really kind of comes out of all of this. So the Orontids of Sophene, they emerged from the fragmentation of Orontid Armenia. So the Orontids had controlled a massive part of the Greater Armenian Empire, and once it was basically broke up, they then founded their own kingdom. And around 260 BCE, they broke away from the Seleucids and then become this vassal state. In the 230s, they attempt it again and were eventually made to submit to Antiochus III. So Antiochus III, the Seleucid king, said, "I don't think so. You are submitting to us. Get back here." And in 188, Antiochus III is defeated at Magnesia, and Orontid Sophene and Artaxiad Armenia, which we won't get to just because they are another one of those massive things that deserve an entire semester devoted to them, but we won't get to them, unfortunately. But Orontid Sophene gets independence, and in around 95 BCE, they're incorporated into the Empire of Tigran II. So they break away from Armenia, and then they are eventually brought back into Armenia again. Orontid Comagene, which is right next to Sophene, was known as Kumu in the Hittite inscriptions, so very much a part of the Hittite Empire. However many days and weeks ago that we talked about the Hittites, they became independent after Tigran II of Armenia was defeated. So though the guy who took over Sophene was defeated by Lucullus, the Roman, and they became independent in 69, but then they were subjected by Pompey when Pompey was making his money in the east and became a Roman ally. And when Crassus was defeated at Carrhae, essentially they see the winds blowing, and here's Carrhae here in Osroene, but they see that the Romans are completely and utterly destroyed, so they're like, hey, we're Iranian peoples, so let's be friends with you. But unfortunately, about 100 years later, they were annexed by the massive expansion of the Roman Empire in 72 CE. So we have kind of three main cities that appear under the Orontids. Samosata was founded around 245 BCE. Awesome name, by the way, as you can see here, kind of dead center of Comagene. And it was on the site of Kumu, so as we talked about, and it was founded by Samis the First, so drawing precedent from the Orontids and Orontes. And Arsamosata, founded by Arsames, you might be able to see a bit of connection between that. So essentially the sites mean kind of founded by Samis and founded by Arsames. And their capital city was Karthiokerta, which is another kind of major city located up north here. So Arsamosata was unfortunately ruined by, that should say Orontid, I apologize. And that should say partially, why did I do that? That's weird. So Arsamosata and Samosata were both totally submerged by two dams. One, the Keban Dam, and the other, the Ataturk Dam. And this is something that is a very hard sticking point for a lot of people. The Orontids, according to the Turkish government, were Armenian. And the Turkish government is not very fond of Armenians. There is an entire genocide to prove that. And basically, the Turkish government basically decided to build these dams, and it seems to be that a very large part of the dam construction was to completely and utterly destroy these Oronted sites. So as you can see here with the city of Arsamosata, this is before the dam was constructed, and this is it after. So only the citadel of Arsamosata remains, and Samosata is completely and utterly submerged. So there's nothing of it left. So I think just to give you guys a bit of a break, we will get to the very fantabulous Nemrut Dog in the next lecture. So we'll talk about Nemrut Dog and the Kushans. So I think that's going to be a good kind of pairing. I think we really talked about a lot in the last week, and I want to give you guys a bit of a break. Save your hands from writing so much. So thanks for enjoying another beautiful day in Western Asia with me. We will get to Nemrut Dog in the next lecture. Don't forget to turn in your paper assignment. We look forward to grading them. So definitely have a great rest of your day. Have a great Tuesday, and I will see you all on Wednesday.